All right. What is the what is the philosophy of the bad student? So there's actually a lot of concepts going around about this idea of being a bad teacher. I believe Alex Ebert coins the term bad guru, right? But I thought about the opposite. What would it mean to be a bad student? Like truly, what does it mean to be a bad student? I think our normal conceptions of a bad student is that you know they're going to cause the teacher problems and not listen and be rowdy and be we this is kind of just a very typical conception. But you know what's interesting about the the child, the student that is rowdy and acting out, he's not really a bad student. He just loves the teacher so much that he only wants that specific teacher's attention, you know. Now, of course, if we're talking about a typical educational setting, about why a child is acting out, someone, um, you know, there's always context. But, anyways, what is the philosophy of the bad student? Okay. I'm not sure if this is going to be the first real building up of an ethics for what does it mean to be a bad student, but here's how I look at it. What it means to be a bad student is to okay, this is going to be a little bit more difficult than I thought to express. Okay. The bad student is somebody that overcomes the teacher, right? It's going to overcome the teacher. But there's a very subtle distinction. And actually, I think O.G. Rose's paper on sublimation and effacement is a really, really good distinction about what we mean by this. So, a student that overthrows the teacher is what I did call the bad student. But it's how the student overthrows the teacher that we have to go into the ethics of it, right? The ethics of it. Um, and my first understanding of the ethics of the bad student is that one must first, how can I put it this way? You must love the teacher with every intention to overcome the teacher, right? That is the whole point. Your Because see the effacement part of the student that supposedly is the bad student, um, is that when they fall in love with the teacher, they want to identify with the teacher, right? But this isn't the bad student. This is what we would technically call, the good student. Um, but the bad student, in my opinion, is somebody that falls in love with the teacher with every intention to overthrow the teacher. What does overthrowing mean, by the way? What do we mean by overthrowing the teacher? Because are we talking about he's gonna physically kill him? He's gonna really take his place? No, 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 no. The bad student is going to overcome his love for the teacher, right? Meaning that he must first build some type of love. I mean, ultimately, it is always a connection of love with the teacher and student. It is always a connection of love. So we could say the love is always there. Hatred is just a disfigured form of love. Okay. Um, so again, the student begins with loving the teacher, but his every intent is to overthrow the teacher. Now, there's a couple of ways I've been thinking about how does one go about this. And one easy method that I have discovered with myself is that yes, if you spend too much time with the teacher, you will start to identify with the teacher. So how do we put something in place here to kind of understand what's going on? Well, see, what's tricky about the online community is that it's very easy for me to have just one teacher and only one teacher. And that is a huge fucking problem. Like a huge fucking problem completely. And this is going to be so toxic and so fucking just explosive for the whole ecology of the online learning community, because if you only hold yourself to be one teacher without connection to other teachers within that same sphere, and I mean, like, see, because here's the issue, right? The way the online community is going with philosophy is that someone is well versed in a thinker, right? And they decide to hold a course and teach about Hegel or something, or teach about was it? I think I took a Carl Jung one time course online. Okay, so you do this, okay, and what happens is the child, the student. I don't know why I'm saying child, but so I guess it's always useful to think in terms of child. Okay, the student doesn't have any diversity to counter his thought. No diversity, none. And I thought about this because when I was in high school, I remember I would get attached to certain teachers, but the thing is, I never was given enough time to get attached to my teachers. I was never given enough time unless I purposely try to make that time. You know, uh, I purposely tried to make that time because other than that, I was on a schedule, right? I had to go and see the other teacher and see the other teacher. Now, what I am thinking about how to prevent this, I don't know. It's a speculation. It's a speculation right now. But I'm thinking like, this idea of like two teachers teaching. For example, I think one time I did take a course with Johannes and Justin Murphy, and it was nice because what ended up happening was uh, Johannes would do a lecture, and then I think the next week it would be like Justin Murphy do a lecture, and so you get like this diversity, and I feel like that there is where you probably prevent it. Um, but see, I think it's always going to remain an issue. The the student the student is always going to be a problem in the online community because again, when you it's because the internet can always isolate one teacher. Can always isolate one teacher. Like, and just to give a really solid example, if I feel like Jordan Peterson is like God to me, and I love him so much that I'm just going to watch all his videos. I'm going to just binge watch all of it. To him, he's like my idol, my teacher, everything, right? If I do that, there's nothing that stops me. There's no barrier to that. Nothing stops me from that at all. I can become completely obsessed with him if I want to be. Completely obsessed with him. And so the danger as a teacher is that this is what's going to happen. If you decide to just be like a solo teacher, yeah, most definitely you will be the victims of this. Absolutely, because the student doesn't have, or I'm not going to say he doesn't have, but he can always just choose just you. He can always just choose you and only you. So what I've been thinking, well, I think what I've been thinking is that somehow we have to mimic in some fashion this idea of changing teachers, right? Like, I almost want to say like teaching assistants or something like that, like where it's multiple people teaching a course. I think that is probably the best bet. I really do think that is probably your best bet at avoiding from a teacher level the transference of a student's love. Now, but again, I think I've really digressed so much because I was supposed to talk about the bad student philosophy. And so the bad student philosophy is this. You aim with every intention to love the teacher only to overthrow him. What does overthrowing mean? Overthrowing mean is that you use what is learned to create yourself, to create something. And it's this very aspect of creation that you overthrow the teacher. Now, there's a very subtle difference between trying to create something out of spite for the teacher and trying to create something by identifying with the teacher, right? It's very easy. It's very easy to appease the teacher. It really is, honestly. It really fucking is. Like, because they're the ones teaching. And all you got to do is always gauge, like, oh, did I say the right thing? Oh, I said the right thing because he's approving. He's agreeing with me. Oh, yes. Like, I'm gonna keep doing that. I'm gonna keep feeding on that. Um, but then, of course, if you don't get that appeasement or that acknowledgement, you start going angry and you start getting upset. To me, none of these people are bad students because they ultimately still want to identify with the teacher, and only the good student wants to identify with the teacher. It's the bad student that wants to overthrow the teacher. It's the bad student that has every intention from the beginning to overthrow the teacher. So what I'm saying is that as students now, students that are interested in learning, students that are engaging in these online platforms and philosophical ideas, is that go crazy and learn everything, learn all that you want to learn. There's so many amazing people out there, uh, and there's again so many amazing people. Their ideas are very attractive, but take all those things, and then this is the part where I'm very Deleuzian. Okay, this is the one little aspect of me that I'm very Deleuzian. Everything that you encounter with the teacher, you take as a tool for yourself. You use that as a tool for yourself to create yourself. It is always about creating yourself. It's not about identifying with the teacher, it's about creating yourself. And that is how you become the bad student, basically. It is about creating yourself. But you must first love the teacher, right? And that's, I mean, but it's a given that you love the teacher. So, and because it's a given that you love the teacher, you must negate that given. But negating that given is not by identifying with the teacher, either through an intense love or through an intense hatred, but it is only through creating yourself. It's a very simple concept, the idea of the bad student, but it's very difficult to put into practice because you need a diversity. You need a diversity of teachers in your loop. You need a diversity of things within your interaction. Um, for example, for me, and I can give some real experiences to this. For me, for example, is that when I started reading Carl Jung, I got really, my God, I got super obsessed with Carl Jung. Like I got super into Carl Jung. I was just speaking that Jungian language. I was so immersed in the idea of the shadow work and everything and all this crap. And it drove me insane. It drove me insane identifying with Carl Jung as my teacher, right? But this is why I said that diversity as a student really fucking matters because you need another teacher to counteract the transference. Because what would end up happening is this, right? I would have an intense love for Carl Jung, okay? And then suddenly I would run into, I don't know, Albert Camus, right? And I'm like, damn, this guy's pretty interesting. I'm starting to like him too, right? But then I make conflict with myself. And as the bad student, you always need to do this. You need to make conflict with yourself concerning which teacher do you love? Which teacher do I love most? Um, but that's the thing. You never answer that question. You just keep doing that to yourself in like this repetitive cycle. Which teacher do I love most? And see, uh, and I'm using thinkers that I've read because I do feel like when I read thinkers, they're like actual teachers to me when I read their work. Um, and so when like I read Hegel and then I start reading Rainer Maria Rilke, this is really important because you start putting yourself in some intense conflict as a student about who do you love? Because if you only stick to one thinker, you self-identify instantly. You want to self-identify instantly. It is absolutely helpless that you will. What is actually more painful, in fact, what was painful for me as I was reading Carl Jung was that I was never going to get his recognition. you know? But the thing is, it was worse because it was like, uh, one, there was nothing to deter me from getting that recognition, but even though I knew it was impossible, but then there was nothing that was going to drive me away from still wanting it. So we've already identified at least two things as the ethics of what I would call the ethics of the bad student is that the student aims at overthrowing the teacher. And overthrowing the teacher does not mean through hatred or through intense love, but through the creation of himself, right? The student must negate himself because you're going to self identify, which is how it should be. You're going to self identify and then you negate yourself. Now, so everybody understands that part. Everybody kind of like understands that part, right? They understand that part. Here's the other issue, right? It's not enough for that to happen, right? A lot of teachers in this space, they understand that students need to create. Okay. Um, they need to create, but the student needs to be in a conflict. Now, the only way that I see that a student can avoid the conflict of his wanting recognition with a specific teacher is to present another teacher that is equally attractive and equally, how do I say attractive? I mean, yeah, I mean, if I saw two hot teachers for economics and, I'd be having time of my life, right? I wouldn't even know which class I want to be in all the time. Okay, I'm digressing. But what I'm saying is that the bad student needs to be in a conflict to prevent the transference from becoming toxic, basically. Um, and I've given examples by my examples of this is my own experience with like reading Carl Jung, and then when I came across, I don't know, was it Albert Camus, right? When I started falling in love with Albert Camus, it started taking away from Carl Jung. But then as I started proceeding through other different thinkers, where is this transference going now, right? It's constant. It's an constant movement and conflict because I don't know who I love the most, and I don't know who I want to self-identify with. And somehow, what I'm trying to say is that this needs to be self-replicated in a actual setting with teachers, real teachers, not just thinkers that we read about, but real teachers. It needs to be self-replicated in some fashion, where you put the student in conflict about who he really likes, who he really enjoys thinking. And the only possibility that you can ever present with that is by introducing him to other teachers. Um, that's it. That's the only thing I can think of. And the teacher can't, he can't just teach it alone or do it alone because, and I've seen this, like I said before, about the dangerous part about teaching online is that even though it gives the teacher freedom, a lot of freedoms, um, it can give a student a super hyper focused transference because the online space can allow the student to only have one teacher. If the student only wants one teacher, then the student will continue to have such. What needs to happen is that as the teacher, you need to make it impossible that he only has one teacher, right? So it's not enough to like cut him off and to turn him away. What you need to do is you need to force his hand, make him fall into another teacher. You need to force his hand. Um, and so I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is just kind of like the beginning. This is for me. This is like the beginning of the ethics of what it means to be a bad student, and also, ironically, a bad teacher, right? Because the bad teacher doesn't spend enough time with you, doesn't give you enough time to fall in love, or he constantly conflicts you about who you do love. It's kind of like uh, if your parents ever does that cruel thing with you about um, you ever ask your parents like, okay, well, which of my siblings do you love more? Do you love me or my other brother? You know, uh, and so you can create conflict with your parents by doing that kind of thing. Like if your dad says, me or and my mother says like my sibling, it's going to cause a lot of conflict. So, but anyways, my it's a poor example, by the way. What I'm trying to say is that the bad student must be in conflict with who he loves, but it needs to be not just the physical teacher. Not it doesn't need to be a conflict like this, but it needs to be a conflict like almost like a triad or more, to where he's like, oh, I don't know if I just love Cadell. I also like Bard, and then he starts, and then you need to introduce the bad students to a lot of people. That's what I'm saying. But it's not enough, and this is my opinion, it's not enough to do it through a forum. Like they need to have real face-to-face interaction courses, everything. The teacher that is by himself uh, can't really be by himself, honestly, because again, like I said, I feel that if you do this, if the teacher goes solo, then you're always going to get that risk where you have one student that chooses to solely hyper focus on one teacher, and he can do so because it is this online space, right? And I gave this example already. Like, if I want to be a student of Jordan Peterson, all I need to watch is Jordan Peterson videos, and that's it. I can ignore everything else and just be completely obsessed with him because this online space allows me to do that. And that's the danger. So, yeah, okay. So let's go back to summarizing. What does it mean to be a bad student? What it means to be a bad student, the first part that we identified, is that you have every aim to overthrow the teacher. But this aim to overthrow the teacher is not to self-identify the teacher or destroy the teacher. Overthrow means to create yourself. That's how I'm defining overthrowing the teacher, is to create yourself. How do you create yourself? By momentarily identifying with the teacher to take those tools to create yourself. Now, I think we all understand this, and a lot of teachers know this, but the other thing that I propose in order for this to actually work, for the student to create himself, is that the student also needs to be exposed to multiple teachers. You need to put his love for you in the ringer, right? In the fucking ringer. Because if you do that, then you can put him into a conflict with himself about, I don't know who I really love. I really do like this person. I really do like this person, right? And then what you're doing is you're keeping that self-identification always at bay from fully completing. It's like you're keeping that self-identification and difference in like attention. And I think the way you can kind of like theoretically picture this is that, the way actual schools function, like an elementary school, well, actually, like a high school, like the bell rings and then you encounter another teacher, and the next bell rings and you encounter another teacher. You're putting the student through a cycle. And somehow we need to replicate that process online, and I don't know how to do it. I don't know how that'd be possible. I've speculated several things where it's like maybe you teach a single course, but you have different teachers teaching a lecture of that course. There's that. There's maybe a part where, again, I just feel like the best way is to make it an actual institution itself, right? Where you have all these teachers within a website and that you can teach courses. I feel like that is maybe one remedy. There's still the danger of like a student just hyper focusing only on one teacher, but he might get curious enough if you expose him to a variety of teachers, right, through the website and so on. And I think it would be very good in order to do that, in order to expose the student to a variety of teachers, I think more of these online teachers need to do duo courses together, because that can really, in my opinion, I feel like that might actually stave off the transference. I think my first experience with that was with Johannes and Justin Murphy. They did a course together, and they basically took turns doing lectures every other week. And it was a really interesting dynamic. Just really, it really was interesting. Like, yeah, I thought it was really good. It really gives you like a nice perspective, because it's like when Justin teaches, it's a whole different atmosphere, and then when Johannes teaches, it's a whole different atmosphere, and you're just exposing the students to these different atmospheres. And I think, again, I feel like I'm ranting too fucking long. So anyways, I think that's the beginning of a thought, beginning of what may be a stepping stone for putting the student in conflict with his own transference. That's what needs to happen, honestly. I feel like that's what needs to happen. I could be wrong and people can agree with me, but I'm just basing it off of my experience from reading books and falling in love with thinkers. The only thing that has completely saved me from self-identifying is that I would stumble upon another thinker and be like, "Oh my god, I love him too." And then I just kept doing that to where now it's like, well, I don't really know. I don't really know who I love. And here's the ironic part, right? Now that people have seen me talk and I'm making content, they're like, well, this is actually what creates myself now. All these thinkers that I read and all this kind of diversity of thought that I've encountered, they're just like, oh wow, this is what Javier is. I like him. But really all I've done is put myself in such a repetitive cycle of preventing the full completion of self-identification that I ironically created myself. And I am constantly creating myself in this arena. And so that's what it means to be a bad student, right? You never fully dedicate yourself to the person. You come in with like almost a half commitment. But I think the teacher also needs to force the hand and force that half commitment. So you need to also be a bad teacher. It needs to be this bad teacher, bad student relationship, honestly. Because I know there's a lot going on about like, oh, what is, maybe we should embrace the idea of the bad teacher. But I think we also need to force the hand and make a bad student. And I've already given my definitions of what that is through this 30-minute rant. Other than that, I will end. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot them. But if not, I think I'm done. It just feels kind of relieving to vent that whole thing. I don't know. Half the time I don't really care if I'm right or wrong. I'm just like. Okay. All right. You guys take care. Bye.